Vale, molt bé, començarem la sessió d'aquesta tarda.
We'll start with the afternoon session.
Welcome back. We are starting the second session this afternoon. Hi haurà un canvi.
There's a change. There has been a change. Not a change. There's a mistake on the agenda. So, this afternoon, we will listen from Isabella Clec, from Manel Lopez, David Perpignan, Anastasia Milou. Did I say that correctly? And Lori Marino, who will be with us through Skype. And the people from Baltimore too. So that's a mistake that there is on the agenda, because Anastasia and Laurie were meant to be speaking tomorrow morning. 9:30 starting time tomorrow. I'll hand it over to Mariluz now.
Que moderarà l'altra sessió. No, pero ya tienes.
Ya tengo una, perdón. So thanks everybody for being back in time. My name is Mariluz. I will be moderating this afternoon session. We were talking about studies with wild animals this morning, and now we are changing into studies with animals in captivity. Now, before we begin, I wanted to mention Mariano Domingo. He was going to talk in the session this morning. Manel mentioned that he couldn't be here. That was because there was a stranding of a striped dolphin last night. Very fresh, which is uncommon here. So he had to stay at the university today to do the postmortem on this animal and some diagnostic techniques they wanted to use. So he couldn't be here. We didn't have time in the end to show the pictures that he sent. Basically, he was talking about all the postmortem studies of the animals that have come to Catalan coasts for the last few years. And to show how all of them have died with interaction with human interaction with fisheries. So with a nice bubble layer, with a lot of food, fish in their stomachs. So if anybody is interested in seeing the pictures or learning a bit more about this, Manel or myself will be here all afternoon, so come and ask us later, no problem. Unfortunately, we didn't have time in the morning to show that, okay? So we begin. How this session is going to work, we really have to stick in time, so I will ask the three speakers to please stick to 20 minutes. I will have my 5-minute and 1-minute thingy, and at 20 minutes I will stand up and get you by the ear and get you out of the stage. So 20 minutes sharp, because then we have to have another speaker and 2 more Skype meetings. So we really have to stay in time, okay? Just out of respect for everybody else. So our first speaker, Manel Lopez. He's a teacher at the University of Barcelona, the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona, and he specializes in welfare and in indicators of stress. And he will be talking to us about the physiological indicators of chronic stress and well-being in captive dolphins. I don't know if I've mentioned, we will only have questions after the whole session is done. So once we're finished, I'll call everybody here, and then you can ask questions, okay? Okay.
Thank you. Moltes gràcies. Abans de tot,
thank you very much. I want to thank the organizers for the invitation. And let's start with this part of animals in captivity. Let me tell you that what we are looking for as a research group is to have indicators that can objectively define welfare or stress conditions in ex situ and in situ animals. So we would like to know what stresses animals. Whale watching was mentioned before, whether food stress is much more important than other stresses. We are interested in knowing how does stress become chronic and what's the impact it has on the daily life of the animal and the health condition. And our activity revolves around the assessment of the endocrine activity, the hormones that regulate the welfare, the reproduction, and the nervous system condition. And this hormone situation can tell us a lot about the welfare and the stress situation of these animals. And of course, it's difficult because we're talking about marine mammals, and it's more difficult to treat and to conduct these studies, but that's what we do at our group. This is not time consumed because I'm trying to skip the slide to move the presentation forward. Okay, allow me to tell you more about stress and the impact of stress to begin with my presentation. And, well, stress is a series of phenomena that take place when the animal feels threatened. And that potential threat basically triggers a stressor, and then there is the interpretation of the threat, of the stress, and the animal responds. How does the animal respond? Well, there's an initial autonomous response to flee or to attack. The fight or flight response. The second response level given by the animal that is postponed in time, the first one is a very immediate one, and the second one is a vigilant response. So if the threat appears again, the animal responds with the second level. So the threat can be physical, mental, or environmental. The first response that helps the animal in an autonomous manner to respond is guided by adrenaline, because adrenaline goes up in the bloodstream, and as it goes up, it goes down again very quickly. So it's fractions of seconds to respond to the stressor. The second response level, which is guided by the production of the adrenal gland, as we call it in humans, it basically produces what we call cortisol, the hormone. You have heard about it. Cortisol, among other hormones, not only cortisol, but that's the main hormone in charge of this response. So what does cortisol do? Mainly, more than adrenaline, cortisol prepares our body to respond continuously over time to the stressor. It basically disseminates energy to the encephalus, so there is more bloodstream, and muscles get prepared because it's the muscles that will allow us to flee, to carry out the flight and respond to the threat. So there is an increase of the bloodstream to the periphery, and there is a release of glucose. We need energy to respond to the threat. What happens with this energy release, if it becomes chronic and the stressor is still there, there is a metabolic imbalance, and the animal might end up developing chronic diabetes or obesity. And we notice that when there is a stressor ourselves, when we see that something is affecting us both positively or negatively, our heartbeat goes up. We notice that in our heart, or our breathing is agitated. It's true that we don't get so much oxygen, but we breathe in a more agitated manner. And at a blood level, and for example, you don't have enough bloodstream to, for example, digest food. It basically blood goes to the limbs to respond to the threat. If this stress becomes chronic, well, this might entail cardiovascular anomalies, hypertension, or obesity and diabetes. Cortisol also generates responses that initially are positive to respond to the threat, but if this becomes chronic, it's troublesome. For example, the immune system, if we have to treat an inflammation, we use corticosteroids, corticoids, and well, the same thing would happen with an animal. This very high volume of cortisol in blood levels might result in autoimmune conditions that are well described for humans, allergies, gastritis, all of these as a result of these high levels of cortisol. And then it has an impact on reproduction, because reproductive hormones start competing with cortisol generation in the adrenal gland, and in the long run this might end up in infertility or sexual cycle anomalies. Not only that, all of you probably, when you have felt stressed or agitated, you can't sleep, insomnia. And for example, cortisol that has a circadian rhythm, well, when night comes, well, the cortisol has to go down so that we can have a rest. And when cortisol goes down, melatonin goes up, and that's how we basically sleep. If we are agitated, if cortisol is very high, well, there is no reduction of cortisol in the evening, and we have sleep problems, memory problems, etc., concentration issues too. So a positive response to a negative thing for our physiology, if it becomes chronic, it can result in health conditions for animals and humans. If we reach a situation of chronic stress, when it has become chronic and when it's really installed, we say that the adrenal gland is no longer able to respond to stimuli that it used to respond to. And that's what we call the adrenal fatigue. The adrenal gland is so exhausted because it has been responding and producing cortisol, it reaches a point in which it doesn't respond anymore. And that's when we talk about apathy. In humans, we even talk about depression when stress has become chronic. When we see stimuli that should steer a response from us, but it doesn't come up anymore. So acute stress, deep down, it is positive. To know that the animal is able to respond to an acute stressor, it basically tells us that the animal is able to offset, to modify its metabolism and physiology. The problem comes when stress becomes chronic, and it does so over time. This is a presentation of cortisol level, blood cortisol levels in normal condition, acute phase, and oddly enough, cortisol levels in a chronic stress situation goes down, and you can't really notice them. So this is telling us that high cortisol is not always a negative situation. The problem comes when the animal is not able to produce cortisol anymore, and then we have baseline levels that are below the minimum threshold. So how can we measure cortisol? Which tools do we have? It's a very important endogenous substance, allowing us to measure the welfare and stress situation of the animal, but how can it be assessed? We can use some samples, for example, blood samples, saliva samples, urine samples, feces, fur, or feathers, for those species that have that, and we get different information from all of these. Because there are structures like blubber or grease, fat, here we have fur represented, that accumulate hormones over time. So when we analyze this structure, we basically have an idea of everything that has, how that hormone has circulated in the life of the animal. And other structures basically tell us things about acute stress. So to assess chronic stress, we need continuous sampling. Feces are a good tool? Well, physics have been used in a satisfactory manner with killer whales in situ to assess how massive tourism in whale watching activities impact on killer whales, and physics can give us health information about the individuals, and of course they give us ID information about the individual. So it's useful in some species. And in the Mediterranean we can assess some of these samples, but in a very specific context. What about dolphins? It's not useful because the sample is too little, too small. We don't get enough information from it, so we can't use it. So in captivity, this is not a very useful tool. What about blood? Blood plasma. Of course, cortisol goes through the bloodstream and it can be detected, but part of this blood cortisol is not effective because it binds to other blood proteins. But we have used it in order to assess how a dolphin manipulation or transportation affects the animal, or how an open aquarium or closed aquarium affects the animal. So we can assess that. Nevertheless, in situ serum can be used and has been used to assess the impact on animal welfare in the case of a spill. For example, this Shoki study from 2014 assessed the level of cortisol in animals in an oil spill area. In blue we have cortisol levels of animals in a clean area without the oil spill, and in red we have the cortisol level of animals in the oil spill area. Oddly enough, cortisol hasn't gone up. No, they have gone down below identification, below minimum threshold, which means that this is a chronic situation. And those animals located in this oil spill area have probably chronic stress. What do we have? Saliva in captivity, and this has been used. What's good about saliva is that the cortisol that gets to saliva, also in humans, it is effective cortisol because it has gone through capillaries, so it is effective compared to the cortisol in the bloodstream. So we have a bioavailability value of effective cortisol. But as in blood plasma, it's affected by circadian rhythm, daily rhythm. This is a saliva sample practice in Barcelona Zoo using an ISOP. Well, if the animal is trained, it doesn't need to be sedated. And here we have the circadian rhythm in cortisol production in saliva. So, just like humans, early morning we have high levels of cortisol so that we are strong enough to do things, but the cortisol is increasingly used up. And currently we're going down. We have had lunch, and of course this makes our bloodstream to focus on digestion, but it's just a natural rhythm. During the day, cortisol levels have to go down so that we can get to evening time with low cortisol. This is just the normal circadian rhythm. Just for you to see which would be the human circadian rhythm. It's the brown line, high levels in the morning and low levels in the evening. In orange, we have the situation of a person with apathy, someone who wakes up in the morning and is not really willing to do anything. So very low baseline cortisol levels in saliva. This is a graph representing the average salivary cortisol levels of bottlenose dolphins in the zoo of Barcelona. So we see a necessary increase a bit later, but there is a peak and then a drop, which is not maintained, goes up again in the afternoon, not significantly. But what's striking about this picture is variability. There is individual variability and even seasonal variability. Of course, we all respond differently on any given day to the same stressor. I mean, sometimes we feel stressed by a specific stressor, and some of the other day we might be or behave totally differently. But we want to use salivary cortisol as a management tool, as an assessment tool, and this would mean that on different days, an individual at the same time, because of circadian rhythms, we would have to measure cortisol levels. The two values that are in red, well, something happened on that day because cortisol is quite high, so we should examine that. It's positive because the animal increased its cortisol levels, so it has responsibility, but we need to examine what happened. We can also see specific interventions. These are cortisol levels of an individual. The scale is much bigger than before, and this would mean that cortisol levels go up dramatically at a moment in which they shouldn't go up. So something happened here. For example, works were being done in the pool, and we want to assess the impact that this had on the animal. And this, of course, is a very specific moment in time during the works that were conducted in the pool, and then cortisol goes down. But of course, this allows us to know that that intervention in the pool meant a stress for the animal. In this group of animals, one of them responds, but the other don't. I'm giving you the scale because this is 300 times more than the previous scale. So there is one individual that responds in a specific manner. Maybe it's the prevailing animal, the one that spearheads the hierarchy in this social group. We are a lab that basically responds the requests of in situ and ex situ studies. We can assess the salivary cortisol levels of different aquaria. Here we see the levels of an aquarium we have come to call Aquarium A. There is a very high cortisol level in the morning, but it's not concerning because it goes down in the afternoon. So in the same aquarium we have different responses. This is in October, and then checking again in December, we see that this animal is more or less an acceptable curve because it looks very much like the average. But this one here is a bit of a problem, the new Dolphin, because it never increases its cortisol level. So we have, of course, to run regular checks to see if this animal is able to produce cortisol in response to the circadian rhythm or to an external stimulus. Here we have another aquarium showing peaks in specific moments of the day. Apparently, the animals increase the cortisol level in moments in which they shouldn't do that. And what is striking is that these controls, these checks, must be done per aquarium, and you can't compare between aquaria, and you have to do it animal by animal. These are data from 3 different aquaria. What does it mean? Aquarium B is worse off than Aquarium A? No, because you have to analyze Aquarium B on itself, because there might be genetic differences between aquaria, which would entail different responses to the stressors. The strategies that we are developing are not to stick to cortisol. As you can see, cortisol is a variable molecule, so if we are analyzing a saliva sample, it needs to be done on an ongoing basis, but we want to combine it with other hormones, and we already have good results in dolphins and other species of a combination with what we call the antagonist, the well-being hormone, which would be a hormone that has to do with reproductive hormones, DHA, or other hormones, and to have the whole picture. So we don't want to stick to this very variable hormone, cortisol. We need to use positive stimuli and see how they react, a specific training, and see how the animals respond, so that we can know that the chronic stress is not irreversible. And finally, do I have a minute? Okay, 1 minute. Let me use it then. In terms of in situ, because so far I've been talking about ex situ, in situ, We do in vivo activities. We use blubber that can be used to study the chronic pollution, the chronic pollutants of the bloodstream, feces, and post-mortem. Well, we can use some animals to assess retroactively specific situations. For example, skin biopsies that we hope to conduct soon enough, epidermis, blubber, etc. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much, Manel, for staying in time. Okay, so our next speaker will be Isabelle Aclet. She comes from the Université Paris 13, and she's an expert in marine mammal welfare. So her talk will be about how can we measure dolphin welfare, developing practical assessment and valid indicators. When you want. Oh, hay que poner esto.
Is this on? Yeah. Okay. Oh, it's not ready yet.
Sorry, that's my fault.
That's okay.
Okay. Ahora.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thank you to the City Hall and Submoon for having me here. My background, just quickly, is that my first degree was in animal welfare in terrestrial animals and farm animals as well. Then I studied marine mammal science, and now I'm just finishing a PhD on developing dolphin welfare indicators. So the results I'll be presenting here is kind of all the studies I've done on dolphin welfare in captivity. Okay, so I'll start with a welfare assessment that I developed as part of my master's, and that's kind of a group of lots of different measures. And then the next part, the PhD research, is actually more on looking deeper into separate indicators that would make up a big assessment. And then the third part, I'll just quickly give some ideas on how maybe this research could be brought together and how we might move forward. So this welfare assessment that I developed for my master's is called the Seawell. And the reasons behind why I thought it was necessary in the lab that I did it at was in Miami in America. It was mostly because prior to 2013, when I did this research, there was hardly any specific dolphin welfare research. There was lots of studies, as we've heard, looking at either cortisol or health problems or behavior, but nobody had really thought about it in a holistic way, brought it all together and asked, is the welfare of these dolphins good or bad, or how even might we measure that? So yeah, social stress was something that was looked at in 2002, again, but quite small studies. These were sort of case studies, and again, it's quite hard to make overall judgments from small sample sizes. And there was an interesting study on vocalization rate in beluga whales, but quite few studies, so there wasn't much to go on. And at the same time, the farm animal welfare science field, farm animals especially, but also laboratory animals and pets, but the field of welfare science was developing into this scientific field where you can use objective techniques to make, you're never going to know exactly the welfare of an animal, but you can make good estimations about what you think it might be feeling, or if it's in good welfare or poor welfare. And one of the things I wanted to highlight was this welfare quality project, specifically because it was a very practical way to measure welfare. It was an EU project in 2004, and the important parts to note about it is that they used animal-based measures. So that basically means either things like the behavior or the disease levels in the animals, as opposed to the inputs of the animals, i.e. like the size of the enclosure or what you feed it. These animal-based measures, you really look at what the result is and what's visible in the animal. And another important development in the field of welfare science is that positive welfare was starting to be looked at. So back in the 1960s when it started, we were only looking at signs of suffering and how to avoid suffering. But now it's good to also look at positive welfare, because that can be, it's not just a one spectrum where if you avoid suffering, you'll be in a positive state. It's good to promote good experiences. And for captive marine mammals, in terms of the legislation around, and still as it is currently, they only used resource-based measures. So currently the welfare of animals is regulated by the size of the pool, or sometimes the cleanliness of the fish kitchen, things that aren't necessarily directly linked to individual welfare. And welfare wasn't measured within the industry at all. So we started developing this assessment. It was developed at 3 open system facilities, and that's an important point because they were natural lagoons and sort of, kind of like sea pens, but the assessment was developed to be also applicable to closed systems. And the procedure for it was that first we did an extensive literature review to propose even the initial measures. And that was based very closely on this welfare quality assessment. We chose that because it had also been adapted for other animals, and we thought it would be applicable for dolphins. Not exactly the same measures as from the farm animals, but doing comparable ones for the dolphins. We then put these measures to a group of experts. We put them from people who had experience working with marine mammals in captivity, and that helped us to ensure face validity, which just means that people agreed that this is likely to measure that. But I'll talk a bit more about validity later. And the third one was the in situ testing of all the measures. By in situ, I mean on the dolphin in front of you. So we tested all these measures. We also used exceptional contexts, and by that I mean exceptional situations, like Manuel was saying, but acute stress, when either there was a social disruption in the group or there was a dolphin had a disease, and we specifically used those dolphins to test our measures to see if they were picking up the welfare problem. And then at the end of it all, we applied the full assessment to the 3 facilities. So the results. There were 36 measures in total, and 21 of these were animal-based. That's the same kind of percentage as the welfare quality, but that means that the rest were based on the resources that you provide to the dolphins. The bottom-up structure just means that it's a way of splitting up the assessment. So you had 36 measures, which fed into 11 criteria, which fed into 4 principles, and that was then the overall assessment. And the interesting thing here is that you can see is that the 4 principles and 11 criteria stayed exactly the same as for the farm animal assessment. And I'll show you a bit more here what they look like. So on the right there you have the 36 measures, and those are species specific to bottlenose dolphins. Then you have the 11 criteria, again same as for farm animals, and the 4 principles. And this is based on a paradigm for measuring welfare called the 5 domains, which is based a little bit before on the 5 freedoms. So it's, it keeps in keeping with the farm animal welfare science. I'm just going to go through a few measures just to give you some examples of what we developed. One of them was body condition scoring. This won't be new to a lot of you. It's used a lot in strandings and wild projects as a sort of general health measure. But we wanted to come up with something that made it easier to have standardized measures so that we could look between dolphins, between facilities, so we developed this graphic. Also similar to what you might see in a vet for your dogs or cats, we used like a 5-point scale, and you measure 5 different points of the body, and this came from the expert opinion of where dolphins most likely to lose weight. And there's a lot of individual variation. Some of them lose weight on the peduncles, some of them other places, so that's why we included lots of different parts of the body. The important thing to say here is that the link with affective state, so how the animal is feeling, is difficult. It's complex with body condition scoring. It's not that poor body condition necessarily means the animal is feeling bad or in poor welfare, but it's quite a general good measure of at least the sort of past few months of the animal's environment, or how it's been responding to the environment. Another measure was rake mark quantification. So we developed a tool to quantify the rake marks as a percentage of the body surface. And this was within the criteria of measuring the levels of aggression in the pool. Now, sometimes rake marks can come from play, but we reasoned that especially if we split up the rake marks into the different body categories, and also if we looked at the difference between old rake marks and new rake marks, we could probably find a criteria or a threshold where a certain level of new rake marks is abnormal, is excessive aggression. And we went about this, as I said, we split up the new and the old rake marks, so that's a little bit what they look like, new and old. And we used a sort of estimation technique. It was nothing too technical, but it's just that we split the body into different parts, and then we used little squares in each of these parts and made estimations of the percentage of rake mark cover in those squares, and then basically put it all together to get an overall percentage. We then made scoring thresholds, which were very conservative because this is a very kind of a new technique. Although these two papers here at the bottom were ones that said that a tool like this would be really useful. Obviously for wild dolphins, it could be applicable to wild dolphins as well. But we did stay conservative with our scoring just because we don't quite know exactly, we don't want to make any welfare implications that are too far-reaching. And so these were the scores. It might be difficult to see the detail, but this dolphin has basically no rake marks, this one has some, and this one has a lot. You can see these aren't actually rake marks, and this is why I say wounds here. We actually included environmental wounds as well, because especially in natural lagoons, when the dolphins chase each other, they'll scrape each other on the side of the pool. So that's also a sign of aggression, it's just a secondary indicator almost. And these were the different thresholds. So we said old wounds, anyway, you can read them for yourselves, but yeah. And just very quickly, I know I don't have much time, but this is an application of the tool. There was a situation where a high level of aggression led to one of the dolphins moving pools while I was there. And so we did this rake mark tool on her in these the 2 weeks or 3 weeks afterwards. And we found that it was accurately measuring the different rake marks. So she started with old wounds of 10%, but new wounds of 18%, which from the slide before is the sort of worst welfare score. Because if you actually look at a dolphin with 18% of its body covered in new rake marks, that looks like a lot, So then a week later, obviously, as the new wounds healed, they became more old wounds, but she didn't have far less new wounds because she was in a different social group and not getting so much aggression. And then the week after, even less. So this is something that I think really could be used as a welfare tool. Again, we need to know a little bit more about how it interacts with play, but it's something that wild and captive could be useful. Eye problems, these are known to be quite common in captive dolphins, and we included 2 animal-based measures. The methods of assessing this is really important because, for example, you can't I'll just show you the measures first. We had 2 scales for how much the animal was squinting and if that eye was discolored or not. And this can be due to lots of different factors, either water quality, shades, training sessions, even genetic. But how to assess it is important because, for example, you can't look at an animal of how much it's squinting by standing above it in the sun. It's something you have to think about all these different methodological things. And to just discuss this, well, first of all, we published this a couple of years ago, and I'd be happy to share it with you if anyone wants a copy. It was objective and conservative by design, so we had these 36 measures, and it was applicable. We found this out when we conducted it in these 3 facilities. And the results did identify the certain welfare problems that we were seeing in some of the animals, and the next stage is to highlight improvements as well. Strategically redundant just means that because there were so many different measures, 36 measures, if you're doing a welfare assessment which, say, takes a day on an animal and for whatever reason you miss the welfare problem or in one of the measures, the strategic redundancy means that you'll hopefully catch it in the other. So actually some measures measure the same idea, but it's just that it's kind of done that on purpose so that we don't miss the welfare problem. And yeah, the structuring of it means you can do it on individuals, on groups, you can look at only certain criteria or certain measures. But in general, the sort of conclusion of it was a first effort, it hadn't been properly validated, and it's just showed us that systematic monitoring of these animal-based measures of dolphins could really only help us to measure welfare, and if you want to have good welfare, you have to monitor it very closely. So now I'm going to move on to my PhD thesis. And the aim of this was to identify valid indicators of dolphin welfare, and I've underlined that because valid means, in this sense, I was talking about that the measures really were indicating either good welfare or poor welfare. So with the seawell, the one I just described before, I was proposing a lot from the literature, we were testing it, they were practical, but we hadn't done, in-depth emotion studies on these dolphins to see how they were feeling, which I'll explain is very difficult, but we had a go. Again, there was, as I described before, the lack of welfare research in captivity led us to write a review paper on dolphin welfare. That was the first study. And it basically just brought all together the past studies which could have some relevance to welfare. And the specific approach of this was to combine behavioral, physiological, and cognitive measures, because those are the three components of an emotional reaction or response in humans and animals as well. And this is a good way to explain it. This guy, Webster, he used the triangulation principle. So if you have the actual welfare of an animal in the middle, and you have these three categories of measures, if you start with one category, you're probably going to get only that close. That's your estimation of welfare. That's probably only so far from the real state. But as soon as you add another one, for example, it's not working, physiological, your estimated welfare moves closer to actual, and if you add another one, then it's going to go even closer. As I said, we'll probably never arrive at the actual welfare state of an animal, but you can get closer and closer with the more measures you include. Our second study of the PhD was, again, quite an initial study, but to look at how some of these different behavioral measures that I'd proposed in the welfare review varied with the daily schedules. And this was a study done between 3 dolphinariums, which was important because it allowed us to see these different results, which might not have been possible with a small sample size. And basically we found that they showed anticipatory behavior before trainings and shows, and I'll talk about this more later because it's a potential welfare measure as well. Play was seen most right in between the sessions, not shortly before, not shortly after. And the most interesting result for me was that slow, close, synchronous swimming was peaking after the sessions. So synchronous swimming is when they swim here together at the same time. And slow, close, we actually differentiated it by the distance and the speed. And we found that specifically this type of relaxed affiliative behavior peaked after the sessions. And I'll describe some more results on this later. And our third study was cognitive bias. Now, cognitive bias is basically the glass half empty, half full paradigm, and whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. And with animals, there's actually it's one of the only, oh dear, that's not very good, only welfare indicators, the only welfare test that gives us a real objective measure of welfare. So I'll just skip through this a bit, and you can ask for details later, but basically any animal, lots of different species of animals, if they're in poor situations, they'll judge more pessimistically. And it hadn't been tested in dolphins before, and nor had the social link been explored. So how to test it? For example, you first have to condition the animals to the cues. So for example, you have the cue here is the food. You have either a bowl of food on one side of the room, or you have an empty bowl on the other. You present this either one or the other. And after a while, the dog will go really quickly to that side because he knows there's food. And he'll go much slower to the other side because he knows it's empty. And then once you've done that, you look at the response to the ambiguous cues. So you put the position right in the middle, and you see how quickly it goes. And we'd think an optimist would go very quickly to the position in the middle, and a pessimist less quickly. And that's what their response times would look like. I'll just skip on. So we adapted this test for dolphins. I'll just go. So it was basically exactly the same, but in a pool with a target. It's not quite working. The dolphin went to the positive cue and got a herring, and it went to the less positive cue. We didn't use anything negative, and it just got applause and eye contact, which is still positive for the dolphins, but not as, a primary reinforcement like a herring. And then we tested the positions in the middle. Sorry to skip through all this, but I want to make it on time. And our question was, are dolphin cognitive biases linked to social behavior? I'm going to try and skip through this. I don't know if this is going to work. Yeah, that was just a video of the test. And first of all, we found that the individuals had stable, repeatable return times, i.e. cognitive biases. So we had some that were optimists and some that were pessimists. And really interestingly, we found that those that were conducting more synchronous swimming together in their free time were the most optimistic dolphins, i.e. the ones that the other studies with other animals have shown are in the best welfare. And this is synchronous swimming. So you can imagine how all that makes sense, that this promotes positive emotions, they're relaxed, they're swimming together, it reinforces social bonds. And these are the results. So you can see this is optimism here, and this is the more synchronous swimming. So here you had the most optimistic and the most synchronous swimming. And we also found that this relationship carried on for 2 months before testing. And I'll just skip on. So from the this is still from the cognitive bias. I'm going to have to skip through this. Sorry, I just want to get on to the next we can talk about it more later, but basically it's very interesting because synchronous swimming could be a first indicator of positive welfare in dolphins, and conversely, lack of synchronous swimming could be a negative indicator. There's a paper as well, and just this last study that I conducted was about anticipatory behavior. So this is any kind of activity that an animal performs in preparation for an event that it knows is going to happen. And it's been used in other species as an indicator of the preference for certain events. So this is anticipatory behavior here. You've got the sessions which always start from this point here, and this is about 10 minutes before the session, and the dolphins are concentrated towards here. You can see this one here, and they're waiting for it to happen. It's basically vigilance behavior. So our last study of the PhD was, will dolphins also anticipate non-food events in their environment, and is anticipation linked to participation in the event? And this is basically how we tested it. We used enrichment as the non-food events and human-animal interactions not related to food. We paired 3 events to 3 sounds, i.e. just a stimuli, a sign to warn the animals that this is what's going to happen, which would then allow us to measure their anticipation. And the results are that we found, first of all, the conditioning worked, because compared to a control event, they anticipated the human-animal interactions and the enrichment much more. The level of anticipation did predict the participation in the event, so those that anticipated, for example, the enrichment the most were those that played with the toys the most. And very interestingly, I found was that, I'll just carry on. That they anticipated they anticipated the human-animal interactions more than the toys, and this was for all of them, and it was statistically significant. So this also poses questions about maybe positive human interactions are really important for captive dolphins. I'm going to skip through this. This is the sort of summary of the PhD findings. And this is, I'm sorry, I'm going to skip through all of this. This is a little bit more about the fact that we could definitely measure welfare in the wild. These are sort of the summary. This is a summary of the 3 groups of indicators, which I think could be useful going forward, but we need more studies on. This is what I wanted to come to, is that the Seawell assessment at the moment is designed to be conducted on 10 dolphins in 2 days, open or closed systems, also probably in sanctuaries, I would think. It has got limitations and it needs more validation. But at the moment, I'm trying to get groups of facilities together, sanctuaries as well, if they want to test the assessment so that the methods can be improved. And I think really interestingly is if you look at these different measures, and I can give them to anyone who's interested later, but the majority of these measures would still apply to sanctuary conditions. Some would have to be adapted, for example, the daily time budgets, if the animals are hydrated, lots of different things like that. But many also highlight really important questions that would need to be asked with developing sanctuaries. For example, this measure measures if enrichment is given. Will enrichment be given in sanctuary context? Does it need to be given? Maybe it doesn't. Training in general, if we don't have training or human interactions in sanctuaries, then we maybe forfeit some of the health measures that ensure that we can ensure good dolphin welfare. And for example, as I showed my results with having a good human-animal relationship, which they found in zoos and other animals, if you have a positive human-animal relationship, that can enhance welfare. If in sanctuaries there's less contact, how else can we, make up for that if we don't have that opportunity for that interaction for the dolphins? And again, this is a sort of practical way it works. You give, sorry, I'm finished. A certain, you give a 0, 1, or 2 scores, and then you can go to the different levels. And anyway, it needs lots of different, more development. But basically my take-home message, I hope, from this presentation is that it is possible to measure dolphin welfare in captivity. And I think especially through collaborations with different research groups, and it is possible in captivity, semi-captivity, and I think in the wild as well. So, sorry it's so rushed. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Isabel. I would have loved to keep listening to you, but I have a mandate. Yes, if you could stay here with us. So the final speaker of the session is David Perpignan from NaturaVets Consultancy. He's an expert in zoo and wild animal medicine, and he will give us an overview of past, present, and future of cetaceans in captivity. Espera que te organizo.
Okay. Bueno, a mí me toca hablar un poco de los últimos 50 años.
I have to talk about the last 50 years of cetaceans in captivity. For you to understand my background, I'm an unusual vet. I have worked a lot with wild fauna, documentary photography, etc., and also with captive animals, not only in zoos, but also with exotic animals. And I'm here checking a microchip on a shark in a zoo in the US. I was very young back then. And when I was a child, going to the zoo was an excitement. I remember the first time I went to the Barcelona Zoo with my school, and we were guided by a monitor at the zoo. And we were watching Ulysses, the killer whale that was mentioned in the morning, through the glass. And I saw that he had many scratches. Well, I thought they were stripes on the skin. I think I was 10 or 12 back then, and I asked the person from the zoo what were those stripes, and she said to me that killer whales had a very sensitive skin, so by rubbing with the pool walls they would get scratched. And many years later, when I had worked with captive killer whales and I had talked to the personnel from the Barcelona Zoo, I came to know that she didn't exactly tell me the truth, because when they were with dolphins, well, dolphins will behave aggressively against killer whales. And at the same time, for many years, I was told the story that Snowflake, Copito de Nieve, had been found alone in the rainforest, and thank God they found it, because otherwise he wouldn't have made it. Those were the first lies I was told in a zoo, and after that I heard many more. And with this presentation, I don't have much time, but I want to tell you the behind the scenes of aquaria, because many things are not known, and I think that the town council should know about all of these before they take a decision. If we talk about dolphins, the first cetacean that was displayed was a white whale in New York in 1861. The first dolphin was displayed in 1938, first killer whale in California 1961, and the first dolphin that made it to Europe arrived in the Netherlands in the Harderwijk Aquarium in 1966, an aquarium that is owned by a Spanish company today. And if this is history, here we have the present. We have 2,500 cetaceans in captivity, among them 2,000 dolphins, 227 white whales, 60 killer whales, and other cetaceans that, since they live in Asian aquaria, well, they are not so well known here. For example, we have 3 white whales in Spain, the only ones in Europe. We have 80 white whales in North America, and in 2015 we had 114 white whales in China, and there might be some more today. So China has half of the world's captive white whales. In Europe we have about 306 cetaceans, out of which Spain has 1/3, well, over 1/3. And the same goes for aquaria. Spain has 1/3 of European aquaria, approximately. Spain has 114 dolphins, out of which 22 are in Catalonia, 10 in Vila-seca, Tarragona, 8 in Marineland, Palafolls, and 4, as you well know, in Barcelona. Let me tell you that in Spain, apart from the 3 white whales, we have 6 killer whales, but we don't have any other cetacean. This will come up once and again, and I want you to know, maybe some of you who have been following the news about the future of the Barcelona Zoo dolphins might have heard about this, but you need to know who these associations are. EAAM is the European Association for Aquatic Mammals, then we have the European Association of Zoos and Aquaria, then we have the AZA in North America, in Australasia, and in Latin America, and the AMPA is not a parents' association of a school, but it's the Alliance of Marine Mammals, Parks and Aquariums. This is a lobby that is paid by Aquaria. I don't have much time, so let me go to conservation straight away, which is one of the main pillars. When we talk about dolphinarium, it's basically an aquarium with cetaceans. So that's how they advertise themselves. And the conservation of cetaceans, or marine mammals, is very trendy lately, thanks to this cetacean, vaquita. Vaquita is a kind of poopies that will probably go extinct in the near future. It is endemic from the Gulf of Mexico. And vaquita has followed suit, or has followed the case of Baiji, the Yangtze dolphin, a freshwater dolphin that went extinct in 2006. For Delphinaria to have a positive perspective on conservation, the first thing that they need to do is to breed these species correctly, which has been a historical mistake. Let me give you some examples. The boto, which is the pink dolphin from the Amazonia, which is not the tucuxi, which is a different species, since the end of the 50s, as far as we know, there are over 160 animals that have been captured for Dolphinaria, and only one has survived in Duisburg, in Germany. The rest of them died without calves, and when they bred, the calves also died. And most animals died 30 days after their arrival at the Dolphinaria. Killer whales, as Eric told us, we know how many of them have been captured and how many there are. There are 60 around the world, and to have these 60 killer whales, we had to capture 160. Capture, a different story is those killer whales that died during capture, and we don't know which figure that would be. And then we have the Marsopa lisa, which is the finless poopies, that is not very well known in Europe. It's basically in China and Japan, but also in South Korea and Thailand. It's a fantastic animal, isn't it? We wouldn't eat it, though Japanese people do. What we know about this species, the finless poopies, we know that it's been located in the Yangtze River, and between mid-60s and mid-90s, we know that many of them were captured for the dolphinary business in China. Most of them died, and those that were captured for Japan, about 200, half of them specifically for Dolphinaria, and the others were victims of bycatch, and they ended up in Dolphinaria. And we know that they are still populations that are decreasing. Baiji, 6 animals were captured, all of them died. 3 died between 17 days and some months after their arrival, and only 1 lived for 3 years, although this one lived for 22 years. And the poopies, the white whale, same figures for this one. We know that there are about 227 white whales, 114 in 2014 in China, and in order to have those 114, many more had been captured, so the population would still go down. And in the case of the US and Canada, which is the other big population of white whales with 80 individuals, as with the other cetaceans, populations are also decreased. Well, in Georgia, some years back, they asked to capture 18 whales from Russia to be imported to the US. Someone talked about the CITES before. In the US, there is a body above CITES in the US, and that body told them not to import and capture those beluga whales. So how does this world work? The minute someone opposes having animals in captivity, well, then lobbies get to work, they write a letter, and they basically say, look, we understand your decision, but it's a wrong decision because it's based on the madness of anti-captivity defenders. And more or less, they threaten you by telling you that if children do not learn about dolphins and cetaceans, it will be your fault. And if cetaceans go extinct someday in the wild, it will be your fault too. That's what happened. And today, the US government has sent out a very clear message saying that they don't believe anymore in dolphins and cetaceans in captivity. It was first with the beluga whale, and this will mean that the population will disappear. There are beluga whales in Alaska in the US, but it's banned to capture them. So basically they commissioned that work to the Russians, and they do that straight away. And then came the issue of killer whales, and different governments took a stand to oppose the killer whale business. And new letter written by the lobbies, and it's more or less the same. You can go on the AMPA website and you will have this information. It's very telling. You don't have to believe me. You just go on the website, look at the statements, and you will see the kind of association that they are. In this letter, for example, they use words such the ones that I've underlined. SeaWorld has been savagely attacked with misinformation and lies promulgated in the deceitful film Blackfish. This is just a sample for you to get a flavor as to which is the language used by these lobbies. In Canada, for example, the Vancouver Aquarium, which is one of the most famous ones with white whales, it has also taken a stand recently, and they will not display white whales anymore. And everything this happens, well, they get the letter from the lobbies, the European Association for Aquatic Mammals, which is a mixed lobby. The AMPA is a pure lobby, but this one is a mixed lobby. It basically lobbies, but it does other things. In 2013, they moved their headquarters to Brussels so that they could exert more pressure on politicians. Brussels is a key place for dolphin area. Well, this is an open letter to the Vancouver Aquarium. I don't have information about this, but I'm convinced that the same letters have been addressed to the Barcelona Town Council with the same language, and probably meetings have been convened and phone calls have been made. On the logo, it says devoted to marine mammal conservation since 1972, which is quite difficult to believe, because in 1972, not even zoos knew that they would work on conservation. So I can guarantee you that when the EAAM Association was created, they didn't have any conservation intent at all. And finally, bottlenose dolphins, because since there are so many animals, we've lost track of the places where they have been captured. We know that there are about 2,000 bottlenose dolphins, probably between 3,000 and 4,000 were probably captured in the wild. Let's now analyze per region. The US, 1,538 capturings of cetaceans for dolphin area, for over 500 dolphins. So they had to capture 3 times more than the figure that they have. What about Europe? Same thing. 537 cetaceans, and at least 306 had to be captured. When we talked about the Barcelona Zoo, just to give you an example, we know that 15 animals have been captured and ended up in the zoo. These figures might vary depending on the animal going first to the Barcelona Zoo and then to another place, or the other way around. And then there are 13 animals that are recorded to be in the Barcelona Zoo, but nothing is known about these animals. These animals were captured between 1966 and 1992, and currently we have between 4 and 6 animals, if we take into account those that are in Valencia. But similar zoos to the Barcelona Zoo have not been any luckier. The Duisburg Zoo, which is quite famous thanks to its marine mammals, well, it has been a black hole for marine mammals. Commerson dolphins, white whales, common dolphins, porpoises, all of them have died. And the Nuremberg Zoo, another famous zoo in Europe, hasn't been any luckier too. So, however you look at it, if you analyze it by species, dolphin area, geographic areas, well, populations go down. They are not self-sustainable. And every year, hundreds and hundreds of cetaceans are being captured for the dolphin area business. Look at this. Oddly enough, we have vaquita at the top, which is about to go extinct, endemic from Mexico. We have beiji at the bottom, an animal that went extinct in 2006, which is endemic from China. And look at the countries with more cetaceans. Number 2, China. Number 3, Mexico. So this should be food for thought. Is it really efficient to have animals in captivity in the wild? They are going extinct. In 2011, the U.S. Mammal Commission commissioned a report, a study, when the Chinese dolphin went extinct, to see whether captivity could have a conservation purpose. And out of the 54 pages of this study that was commissioned to a university person, someone from a zoo and someone from fisheries, well, this was the conclusion reached. The big amount of animals needed to avoid congenital problems inbreeding and to adapt animals in captivity, limited space, well, it's very unlikely that captivity breeding will result in a better conservation of cetaceans. Something else that was included in this conclusion is that captivity breeding has not contributed to the effective conservation of any cetacean species. I'll skip this. These are the killer whale captures. Here we have the taiji capturing. I'll give you an example. In 2016, out of the more or less 1,000 animals that were captured, 198 ended up in dolphinaria, only in taiji. And we have to add up to these the animals captured in other places of the world. So hundreds of cetaceans are still captured every year when we've been 50 years to try to breed them in captivity. And there's no end to these. Apparently, it's going to be on the rise. And if we are ever able to breed, to reproduce these animals in captivity, it doesn't really matter because reintroduction in the wild is very complex, difficult and expensive. It's not advised, it's not recommended by everyone. Even the EAAM tells you that those who are critical with zoos, they say that these animals that have been used to human display are not very likely to survive if they are released to the wild. So breeding these animals does not have an effective impact on conservation efforts. This is the letter that was sent by this association, this lobby, to the Vancouver Aquarium. Look at this. They basically say that the world has missed the opportunity to save the beiji, Chinese river dolphin, when there were only 19 individuals left. The beiji is the first dolphin species that we let die out with dignity because humans did not take responsibility and capture the last known individuals to breed for future release. This is a sheer lie because 6 animals were captured, they all died, and secondly, because science tells us that if you capture those animals, they will die. But if mentioning the dead ones is not enough, they once again strike with the vaquita. So if now we take on the responsibility to take vaquita into captivity, we will be able to conserve them. Well, we will kill them, as it happened with other dolphins. There is no difference whatsoever. What we've learned with other species is not applicable to those species that we don't have in captivity. We need decades before we know how they work, and we will know how they work if they survive. What happened with white whales, with killer whales, and with bottlenose dolphins. The other species, we don't have them, not because they are more silly, but because they did not survive. But this letter, which is a gem, as you can see, when this lobby has to talk about conservation, when they have to give an example, which is the example that they quote, well, the all-famous condor of California. They are a marine mammals association, and they don't even have a single example as to how Dolphinaria have been able to conserve marine mammals, and they have to quote the Californian condor. And the Commission said it. Dolphinaria have never significantly contributed to the conservation of any species. My time's up, and I did not realize, so let me summarize the following for you. If breeding animals is not useful, maybe having animals, and if we use the ticket, the entrance ticket money to conservation might be useful. Well, unfortunately not, because less than 1% of what a person pays to go to a dolphinarium is devoted to conservation. And in some Spanish dolphinarium, it's much less than 1%, and they use foundations and opaque structures to deviate the money. So zoos do not devote any funds to conservation. I had much more, but 20 minutes is not much, so I'll have to leave it at that. I believe that it's very important to know how lobbies work and how the industry works in order to take a decision, and the town council must be aware of that. And by knowing this, of course, I will be respectful of any decision that they take. But we can't say, oh, now we're here, or we send the dolphins there and the US Army is experimenting on them, or there's a trainer that ill-treats them, or there is a conservation experiment, or there are shareholders that are basically having the profits of these dolphins. You need to know this in advance. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, David. Pues tenemos 5 minutos para preguntas, o sea que el que levante la mano más rápido, ahí está. El que levante la mano más rápido, ahí atrás.
Hola, buenas tardes. Soy Monse y quería preguntar ahora en la última charla que hemos escuchado.
Hi, I'm Monse. Sorry, I wanted to ask, when we were listening and we heard about captured dolphins and the ones that are in different zoos and delphinaria, didn't you think of those who died at an old age and others that might live elsewhere? So, I mean, the way you compared dolphins captured for the different facilities and the current ones, I mean, sometimes it doesn't make any sense to compare. Yeah, I did assess. Regarding those that die of an old age, have nothing at all to do with what I'm working on, because, of course, one thing is the ones you capture, and another is end population. If you want to go for conservation, of course, you've got to produce more than the ones you catch. If you produce less, well, then you're not doing any conservation whatsoever. So those who die of an old age, I'm not interested in them in that comparison, okay? The second part of your question, yes, of course, I did take it into account. There might be some zoos that have bred many and have sent some animals to other zoos, but it's not the case. Maximum you get +1, +2, that's the main difference. But in general terms, it's not at all the case that you have zoos that have been breeding dolphins all the time and sent them elsewhere. No way.
Hola, David.
Hello, David. What's the price of a killer whale, and what can SeaWorld generate in profit every year? So, do you think SeaWorld pays a lot for what it does? Listen, I don't know what SeaWorld paid for Ulysses, but I'd love to know. A killer whale, listen, I think is €500,000, approximately €500,000, I think. Seeing and analyzing expenditures and what have you, might be a bit more, even, €500,000. But you have to think that to date, a dolphin is between 60,000 and 150,000 euros. So a killer whale, yeah, I'd say 500,000. Sorry, the other question? Oh, the profit generated. Well, SeaWorld is in the stock exchange, and everybody knows $1,400 million. That means $900,000 that they give to conservation projects. That's 0.6%. Another example, Parques Reunidos, also in the stock exchange, they generate more than 500 million euro per year in profit. Here, Alex, and then if there's time, I would go to her. But first, Alex raised his hand. Hi. Very fast for Manel. Two questions, Manel. First, in one of the graphs that you showed us, you were explaining that there are some dolphins that essentially maintain the baseline cortisol, meaning that there were no increases of cortisol. Why do you think this happens? Because of this chronification of stress? That means that the system is not working properly? This is one question. And my other question regarding these stress cycles and having analyzed the different axes, for example, HPA and so on, well then, are you using some kind of drug or something that might reduce this stress linked to this HPA axis? In case of animals, I mean, in the kind of bottlenose is more difficult, but there are other dolphins that die very quickly, usually because of stress. Are you working in this direction? Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, the variability of cortisol levels means that one has to have very good follow-up. This low level of cortisol, of course, is something new in inverted commas, yeah, because we are kind of contributing this. And I believe it's the mission of the Delphinarium to take this into account and decide the strategy that they're going to implement. What we are working on right now is on the fact that a low level of cortisol with a low level of the antagonist hormone, in inverted commas, HDA, means that you have to be very careful because the animal might not have a great ability to compensate, and then you can't actually reverse the situation. But if you have a low cortisol level, but on the other hand you have the other levels of hormone very high, well then yes, there is the ability to compensate. And in our report we would recommend that yes, in the case of this animal, you have to try and handle the animal in a different way to see whether a stimulus would entail a recovery of acceptable cortisol levels. But of course, we are a lab, really. I mean, we can suggest and recommend, but we don't know whether people follow up on what we recommend. It's what we suggest they should do at the Delphinaria. But, of course, where they have more contact with the animals is where they should have to introduce these positive stimuli in order to work on better compensation. It's also true that at different times of the year, well, I mean, the species is also seasonal, the way most are. I mean, there's a higher sexual activity in summer, for example, so then there are more problems that come from stress in summer because of this sexual activity. So at the end of the day, I mean, it's in our case, I mean, cholesterol, yeah, levels, we kind of do a test once a year. With dolphins, you can't do it once a year. It's not sufficient. If you want to have a clear answer to the question, are they well in captivity? Well, we can value their well-being with behavior, and we can do it as well on the basis of this, and we can certify better. The physiological side of hormones can be very helpful. As to treatments, drug treatments, well, typically we know drugs are given in Delphinaria because of cortisol, but rather on the basis of observation and behavioral changes. One can give inhibitors of behavior as to prevent, not letting the animals become too excited. But of course, it's not us who do that, as I said before. I mean, we are the lab analyzing. We're not in contact with the animals. I mean, we can suggest, and always looking for this positive stimulation. The use of other hormones in greater figures gives more security. I mean, cortisol is very variable, even in one same individual. And in one single morning, it happens to us as humans too. I don't know. Depending on the week, you have different responses, and this differential response can have a genetic explanation, but a seasonal one too. Time for one last question.
You want to come and start uploading your presentation?
Yeah, hi. My question and really my ideas, I'll be as brief as possible. I do speak very fast, so with that, this is for David. First of all, I wanted to congratulate you. I mean, the level of the presentations has been excellent, but most especially I was impacted by David, by your presentation. You've been very brave, very honest, and very straightforward in the way you've talked about your professional experience. Honestly, because one finds that this is missing in the scientific community, especially in our country. There's no involvement, and inverted commas, people don't dare risk anything. So I'm so happy you were so intense in your presentation. When you talk about lobbies and when you talk about, these pressures and these institutions and agencies, we do agree. For example, in the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, it's been a member forever for kind of and then as a president of my association, I constantly receive... Sorry, you have to go for the question. We really don't have time for this. I'm sorry. No, it's a pity because I wanted to denounce this publicly. Maybe tomorrow we'll have time to talk about it because it's because of David's words, lobbyists, profit, private companies. We have to talk about cetaceans in captivity. Listen, I didn't talk a lot about lobbies. I mean, what I had prepared was much more, but finally I only got 20 minutes. You do have websites in the European Union where you can analyze lobbies. I mean, EAAM, it spends more on lobbying activities than on conservation. Loro Park in the Canaries spends up to 100,000 on lobbying. Yeah, but we don't have time, I understand. Yeah, but to lobby is not necessarily something negative all the time. No, of course not. In this case, I'm talking of the kind of negative activity lobbies. But if you have to cut me, I'll stop talking and I'll mention it somewhere else. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We don't have time. It's a great pity. Yeah, I know, because some people go on forever and you're not really letting me. It's a pity. I think it's good for us being here to know where we are. So that's why it would be important to talk more about this. I'm so sorry. We don't have time for more questions. No, because I'm even being told off. I mean, I'm so sorry. Thank you to the speakers of this block. It's been great. You've been very good about your 20 minutes, and we continue with the next session.
Vale. La sesión 3.
Third session is of alternatives to captivity for animals who have been kept in captivity for a long time. I apologize, I was speaking Spanish. I go on to Catalan. I apologize to the interpreters. I hope it's not a problem. Yeah, well, so I move on to Catalan. I would take advantage of this to say thank you very much to the interpreters who are making quite an effort, an infinite effort. Thank you from the interpreters. It's a pleasure. However fast you all speak is great, very interesting. So, and I'd like to remind the speakers to be as clear as possible so that the interpreters can do their job better. Now, we're going to hear about case studies that have to do with the adaptation and the release. It doesn't mean release into the wild, but it means that once facilities, captivity facilities are closed, well, examples of failures and successes of these animals that have been released and have gone elsewhere and gone to other facilities or to sanctuaries. This presentation has Anastasia Milo from the Archipelagos Institute of Marine Conservation. She's going to be talking about under construction Aegean sanctuary in Greece, a solution for captive dolphins. Then we have through Skype Lori Marino, President of the Whale Sanctuary Project, and we'll be hearing about the Whale Sanctuary Project. And after that, we'll have on Skype as well from the National Aquarium of Baltimore. We'll be listening to John Racanelli. And the title is National Aquarium Dolphin Sanctuary Plans. So you have the floor, Anastasia. The microphone, please.
Okay. Hello, it's a real pleasure to be here. I want to thank you for the initiative, and I really want to thank the representatives of the municipality of Barcelona, not only for the invitation, but mainly for having an open mind and an open heart to, take the brave step and the initiative to make the difference in Europe and to have a different perspective on captivity, release, and what is moral treatment of dolphins. I come from the other side of the Mediterranean, and what I want to present to you today is the Aegean Marine Life Sanctuary, an effort that has started since, I don't know how this is playing. Can you press click? Can you click on this, please? Anywhere. Yeah. No. Back and click on the black screen, anywhere. Thank you. The video didn't play very well, but I think you got a really brief taste of the work that we're carrying out on the creation of the sanctuary, the Aegean Marine Life Sanctuary on the small island of Lipsi. As many of you do not know of Archipelagos Institute, I think it's worth to steal a few from my very few 20 minutes to introduce who we are and what we do in the Eastern Aegean Sea. Archipelagos Institute is an organization that is combining applied research and conservation with a sole mission to defend what is possible, what is left from the natural resources of the Northeast Mediterranean. And for this, we combine applied scientific research and conservation actions. We're on the islands for the last 17 years, 365 days a year, and we work really close with the local communities. That has been our basis, and that has been the biggest investment we have done. How is this? Perfect. To work very closely with the locals. Initially it was very difficult to gain the trust. Ecologist in Greece is a swear word, so we had to change that. And slowly we gained the trust, they were on our side, and a lot of positive outcomes are happening. I don't have the time to talk a lot about it, but I'll show you one picture in the middle of the common dolphin that was caught on the nets of a fisherman. This fisherman, I know him the last 17 years, and he's always mending his nets that are damaged by seals and dolphins. And when he caught this one, he says, I caught a dolphin, but my heart wouldn't go to kill it, and I released it. So it's one of the many animals that are released through positive cooperation and through the trust felt by the fishermen that we are working together to find solutions and to protect the seas, because if there are no fish, it's not enough for the dolphins, it's not enough for the fishermen. So through community-based conservation and our amazingly long effort to work with the local communities. We're working for a number of conservation projects. Archipelagos is on the eastern corner of the Aegean, very close to Turkey, and we have 7 bases on 7 islands, each specialized into different fields. About 75 people working in the different stations that are hosting our laboratories, our study rooms, and our 4 research boats that are at sea as much as possible, gaining data, gaining understanding. And in this effort, we cannot be alone. We have the support of a lot of scientists, universities, experts that are accrediting our work and are giving us the expertise and the knowledge in these conservation efforts. And Archipelagos is, for this reason, an important part of many international organizations and advisory boards for marine conservation in Europe. We are happy and lucky to be in one of the most biodiverse parts of the Mediterranean, only because we were never a wealthy country to develop enough to cause enough damages, as many other parts of the Med were. But this doesn't mean that we're going to have this wildlife tomorrow, if we don't apply efficient conservation measures. So it's a long fight and a long effort to find, not only to monitor the species, which you all know how demanding work it is, but also to find the problems that they're facing. Here you can see some images from the boat doing research, and so we're not only monitoring the dolphins and the marine mammals, but also the fish stocks, and in relation to fishing activity, in relation to habitat damage, seagrass meadows, coralligen reefs, and many other. So we're trying to have a holistic approach onto the ecosystems, the problems, and the solution that can be developed and applied together with the local communities. Through the day one that we were out in the Greek seas on conservation actions, we had the constant problem of strandings, live strandings, dead strandings. We had 1 monk seal orphan last Friday, another sick bottlenose dolphins previous week, and it's embarrassing to not have a facility to take care of these animals. So initially we didn't start to make a sanctuary for formerly captive animals, but our idea was to create a sanctuary as a humane, close to the natural environment rehabilitation center. If you asked me about sanctuaries some years ago, I would tell you that definitely there exist many. I remember as a student, about 20 years plus, people talking about sanctuaries, how they should be made. 20 years have passed, same words are said, no sanctuaries exist. So we said, we can do it, why not? Let's open the path, and many others will follow, and many others will join, because the cause is common and everyone believes on this. As a child, I remember that it was acceptable to have metal cages with cement floor on lions in Athens, in other parts of Europe. Now this is unacceptable. Some decades ago, humans were putting in exhibit other humans, and we all know the stories. I believe that in a few years' time, our children will say that some years ago, people were putting dolphins in pools and were clapping when they were jumping. This is changing, and it's very hopeful to see the change in the Barcelona municipality. And it is Lipsea, Aegean Marine Life Sanctuary in Lipsea Island, was a site visited by the Barcelona municipality, and it was very interesting and constructive to see, and very interesting to see how strong sailors they are, apart from people with a very good awareness on conservation issues. So we had a study visit in the previous months, in last winter, and on this sanctuary, a sanctuary that will have 2 sections, one to deal with strandings of wild animals, and one to deal with the formerly captive dolphins. We do have many bad examples and not have time for it, but I'll mention quickly one. In Finland, Delphinarium closed down, no sanctuaries existed. These dolphins, after 10 months of remaining in captivity, not performing, were sent to Athens Zoo. One has recently died, and the other one is still performing. Negative practice, negative publicity. The intentions were there, the means were not. We cannot afford another mistake like that. So what we propose as a solution is the Aegean Marine Life Sanctuary in the Eastern Aegean. And as Greeks, we feel we have even a greater responsibility. We are in a country that had respected dolphins for many years. 2,500 years ago, if you killed a dolphin in Greece, you had to deal with the death penalty. It was the first country to start research on this. 2,500 years of gap, but we believe it's our extra responsibility to bring respect in this part of the world. Back to dolphins. The sanctuary in Lipsi is aimed to be not a dolphin sanctuary, but a marine life sanctuary, not another pool with the dolphins in the sea, but a rich marine biodiversity ground where the animals can see rich wildlife and marine life as all the ecosystems of this area. This is the location. As you can see, it's a very small island in Greece, inhabited only by 800 people. And the Bay of Roulia, where the sanctuary is going to be, is what we consider an ideal location, for which we have already leased a building, a large building of 600 square meters and 5 hectares of land, and the constructions are happening there. The strong participation of the community in a process that started for their engagements 5 years ago is a key element for the success of this endeavor. There's many prerequisites, and I wish I had more time to explain you more, but it's an ideal site as there are no conflicts, there's no one, all the land is public around, so no one can build or develop it. There's a completely controlled access. The temperature profile is ideal. The support by the local community and authority is there. Highly biodiverse, and the fjord-like structure of the bay that reaches about 42 meters in depth in the deepest points makes it shelter from the rough seas. The island, very, very small, but also, like Barcelona, has very progressive authorities who are in full support of the sanctuary. And it's a Natura 2000 site with a traditional fishing community. And they're working hand in hand with our team of scientists for the development of this endeavor. Something interesting I would like to show you is the area of the sanctuary superimposed with the area where the dolphins are currently kept in Barcelona Zoo, which you can see the big difference in area. And this is not only Barcelona Zoo. Similar differences you see, because Barcelona Zoo has 4 dolphins, the Harderwijk Dolphinarium in Holland has 33 dolphins, and the Athens one has got 11. So it is a very interesting to see the difference and to compare the space that currently these animals have, confined in a small metal cement pool, with the sanctuary. The sanctuary, however, cannot work alone. Soon it will be saturated. There's about, you heard from the excellent presentation of David earlier, there's more than 300 dolphins in Europe and more than 2,000 in the world. So we need many sanctuaries, and we need them to be constructed fast so that we can start giving an end to the ongoing problem of captivity. So Site 1 is in progress, and recently, previous months, we started the construction of Site 2, which is 15 miles south on the island of Leros, and 3 more sites are planned for the future in order to be able to address the problem that will have to do with increased demand for dolphins to be released from various parts of Europe. A lot of innovation, a lot of development. The team around the sanctuary are working very hard to be able to develop the protocols and the processes. One of these is live food. We believe the dolphins should be fed live fish, gradually be adjusted to live fish and not frozen, as it has highly nutritional content, and not rely on dolphins coming from South America by a trawler, but something that's produced locally from a small organic aquaculture unit, which is 15 miles south from our site. Similarly, other innovations have to do with selective enrichment of biodiversity through the release of live discards or through selective release of detritivores who are going to deal with the management of the waste of the dolphins. Some sites there was a lack of Posidonia, so we started 3 months ago replanting some Posidonia meadows, which is also an experimental activity, but also supporting biodiversity. And some eco-friendly artificial reef constructions are already set up in order to increase even more biodiversity, because we will need it in a site with so much demand. There is a lot of interest around the impact assessment, mainly for us, but also on those who are skeptical on the project. And the closest, because we're in a Natura 2000 site, which is even a bigger responsibility. So the consultancy that has been hired to create the impact assessments and all the other related reports. They are using the protocols used for aquaculture units who are operating in a Natura 2000 site and aiming to ensure that what the presence of the sanctuary is only going to increase and benefit the ecosystem and not going to cause an impact to it. So this is an ongoing process and according to the most strict EU standards. Funding, that's always the issue. We all know it, especially those of us who work on the NGO world. The cost of first establishments is about €500,000, which already started and already a part of it has been completed, as you will see in the next slides. And this is all funded by private sponsors and by self-funding by Archipelagos Institute. Very rightly, the speaker from Italy, whose name I don't recall, I have a really bad memory of names, this morning mentioned that it's very important for a sanctuary to have a long-term financial stability and not to have funding enough for a year or two, but to have it for the years to come. And this is also our major concern. And thankfully, because of the innovation, because of the interest, because of the pressing need of sanctuaries to occur, we have a strong commitment by some foundations abroad on, as soon as the first steps shoots off and we have the sanctuary operating and licensed, that they can commit to contribute to these running expenses, and similarly educational activities like the one I am leading to be in Aegean tomorrow, training UN scientists on protocols and other like high standard educational activities, addressing to specialized attendance is a way of self-funding without creating a public that will create harassment to the animals. Something important, there's a lot of critics on the low budgets, but low budgets are very important. Important not to have low budget as badly made, but low budget as, you know, keep the costs as low as possible, because we shouldn't forget we have 2,000 animals in captivity or more, as David said earlier, and they have to start being released gradually. If we invest, if we need 20 million for 20 dolphins, that means that for the 2,000 animals we need a lot of millions. That's not going to be realistic. So a lot of effort has been made by our experts to try and find ways to reduce cost to as low as possible, but to as high quality as possible in many ways, which is a long discussion to be made later. The licensing process is another big thing that I could discuss with you in more detail later if you're interested, but it's in progress by a consultancy to be able to complete the first licenses. So the first phase of the constructions was completed in August, and started in May 2016. The second phase is ongoing now, and until February we expect to have completed the first phase of the licensing and the next phase of the equipment and the constructions. It's a lot of hard work, difficult to be described in 20 minutes. The following phase will start in March, following the issuing of the licenses and ensuring that we have the different pieces of equipment that is needed to be efficient, not only complying with Greek law, but complying with what is best for these dolphins. Greek law has quite low prerequisites, but we're going much higher than that in order to make sure that we can deal with crisis, we can deal with pollution incidents, we can deal with marine debris, we can deal with possible other emergencies that can happen, and these can be many, believe me. The first year of complete operation is expected to be January 2019. However, in the case that more funding is found earlier, which is what we aim to get, we might be able to take this earlier and move the steps much faster. So it's, this is the current plan, but we have high hopes for being able to move much faster. This is an image of how our architects have designed the inside part of the building, which we are very welcome to visit if you want to find out more information in person. Protocols are in development, not from us only, but from a group of international experts who have experience. Some are experts in renewable energy, some are experts in marine mammal first aid, some have worked with animals in captivity, and many, many other fields. So we are working on protocols for transport, for feeding, for minimum handling. There's a big debate between people working with captive animals and people like myself who are working with wild animals on what's the minimum necessary handling to have good control, but to not have the constant contact that is in Delfinaria. Of course, no breeding is a very hot topic to discuss. Crisis management, especially oil spills, disease prevention, protocol for invite-only visitors. Who are they? How much can they stay? What's the minimum that they can be in the area to reduce stress? And the use of real-time media, underwater cameras, hydrophones, and many more for awareness raising through Wi-Fi. Images from Leipzig can be shown in Barcelona, can be shown in the US, can be shown anywhere in the world. We are blessed with very good technology at this time, day and age. So I won't take it long. I'll just close mentioning that, times are changing. Captivity and perspectives of people in captivity are changing, and we have to be ready for this. The Aegean Marine Life Sanctuary is a platform open for cooperation for people who are well-intending to give their time, their expertise, their knowledge to make this even better. And for us, we consider this an opportunity to develop the gold standard protocols and to do the first step, and others will come later. It could be a realistic solution for the Barcelona dolphins, I believe, because it's something the Barcelona dolphins need an urgent solution, and we're currently progressing the constructions. But this is a long discussion to be made on all the parameters and all the criteria. Unfortunately, I won't be here tomorrow because I need to be urgently back in the Aegean, but we'll be in communication for the next steps. Thank you very much for your attention.
Anastasia, could you please sit here, and we will have time for questions at the end of the session, because there is 2 Skypes waiting, and because the difference of timetables.
I'm on now.
Hi, Lori. Hi. Hi, welcome. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Could you please share your screen?
Yes. One moment.
Yeah, the positive sign of the screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
There we go.
Pot començar? Okay, so thank you very much, Lori, for attending the workshop. I already present your talk, so you can start with the talk whenever you want. You have 20 minutes, and well, I will.
There's a bit of an echo on this end, but I can just begin. Go from there.
Sorry?
There's a bit of an echo on this end, so I couldn't really hear what you were saying.
Okay. Sí, que no oye. Yeah, you can start with your talk. I will show you 5 minutes left heading when you have 5 minutes left.
Okay.
So you can.
5 minutes.
Exactly. You can start.
Okay. So I'll stand by. Okay. Well, let me start. Let me begin then. Just to wish everyone, well, it's good afternoon there. And I want to thank, everyone, the organizers, for inviting me to this wonderful conference. I wish I could be there in person, but I'll share with you a little bit of what we're doing with the Whale Sanctuary Project. So, as you know, what we're doing with the Whale Sanctuary Project is trying to find a way to provide a sanctuary, not for bottlenose dolphins, but for actually the largest dolphins, the orcas. And the way I look at it, orcas or killer whales are just very large, very smart, and very long-lived dolphins. And they are, in fact, as you know, members of the Delphinidae family, with a very long lifespan. The thing about orcas and other cetaceans is that they're very intelligent, they're self-aware, and they're cognitively very complex. And this adds to their vulnerability in captivity. So if you look at the killer whale brain and the human brain, you can see not only that the killer whale brain is larger than the human brain, but it's also larger than you would expect for an animal of their body size. Not only that, if you look at the cortex of these two species, you can see that the cortex of the killer whale brain is very highly expanded in areas that are related to processing of social cognition, problem solving, etc. And in fact, a recent study by Sam Ridgway found that the part of the brain that's involved in higher order processing, the telencephalon in orcas, is that takes up more of their brain than in the human species. So if you think of telencephalon as being the part of the brain that does a lot of the thinking, it is technically true that orcas are brainier than humans. Now, as we know, they are adapted to traveling in all spatial dimensions. They can dive to depths of 100 to 200 meters when foraging, and even beyond, actually. And they may travel over 100 miles a day in a pod. They live in strongly bonded, complex social networks. And these social networks are shaped by deep-seated cultural traditions. This is a recent photograph of wild orcas that we were able to see in Johnstone Strait, British Columbia, just a couple months ago. They travel in pods. This is the A30 pod. And this is an idea of what their life is like in the wild, traveling long expanses in family groups. And this is what orca life is like in a marine park and aquarium. On the upper left in the circle, you can see the Telecom, who's now passed away, in his tank, SeaWorld Orlando. And on the right, below that, is Lolita, or Tokate, in her tank at Miami's Aquarium. Now, as I mentioned, the intelligence and awareness of cetaceans, including orcas, make them more, not less, vulnerable to the effects of living in a sterile concrete tank. And because of that, most captive orcas do not live past 20, 25 years of age, when in fact they can live 60, 70, 80, 90 in the wild. And of all the wild orcas, over half have died after only 4 years. They suffer from all kinds of infections, behavioral abnormalities, and many other stress-related conditions. And we're all, unfortunately, familiar with the terrible situation that Telecom had to deal with. These Telecom his teeth when he was alive, and these are the teeth of a wild orca. You can see the difference. We all know that recently Casata at SeaWorld or San Diego passed away from some kind of a skin infection and lung infection. We don't know what yet. Whether we'll ever know, it's not clear. And all kinds of hyper-aggressive situations that occur. So this is a bad situation, and you all know that. I don't need to tell you that. But the question is, what is the alternative? And the alternative, in my mind and in the mind of many people who are here in the audience and other scientists, is to phase out keeping these animals in concrete tanks and establish permanent sanctuaries for them. So the Whale Sanctuary Project's mission is to establish a permanent seaside sanctuary where cetaceans can live in an environment that maximizes their well-being and autonomy and is as close as possible to their natural habitat. So in this concept, we are looking for a site, excuse me, where we can create a cold water natural environment sanctuary for 5 to 8 orcas, as well as belugas retired from entertainment parks. We will do rescue and rehab, so we will also serve as a place where stranded or injured or ill wild animals, wild individuals can go and be treated and possibly released. We plan to provide world-class scientific and veterinary care. We also are very, very interested in the sanctuary being not just about captivity, but building a bridge to conservation. And we're doing that in a number of ways, and we'll continue to do that. We're very interested in and invested in making sure that the sanctuary that we build educates the public about the importance of preserving and conserving wild orcas and belugas wherever they are as well. We will have authentic, interactive public education. That's a very exciting component of this that will go way beyond the site itself. And we will be transparent and share information because we feel it's very important for those of us in the sanctuary business to share and to support each other so that we can do the best we can for these animals. Here's a concept rendering of what we want to do. This is very recent, and this rendering was created by Brad Ant. And it just gives you a sense. It's not a photograph. It's not even a drawing of anything that we have right now, but it gives you a sense of what we're trying to do. We're looking for a bay or a cove that has sufficient depth and can be cordoned off or netted off. We will have an animal care and veterinary facility right on site, 24/7 staff. We will have housing quarters for the staff. We will have a viewing area for the public and state-of-the-art net enclosures with security buoy lines. And you can see here some of the retired captive orcas that we will have. Now, some of them may have to be separated from some of the others because we won't be breeding them. But they will have an order of magnitude more space to move than they would ever have in the largest tank that's available to them now. So these are sort of our guidelines for the sanctuary. Their residents will be protected from human exploitation. They will have lifetime care. There will be cutting-edge public outreach and education. There will be no performances, no breeding, and no intrusive research. Where are we looking? We're looking on both coasts. On the East Coast, we're looking in Nova Scotia, and on the West Coast, we're looking in British Columbia and Washington. And the reason we're looking in those regions is because those regions fit the environmental envelope or criteria that these animals, orcas and beluga whales, need to survive and thrive. Here's some of our site selection criteria. Obviously, it's a mixture of both physical environmental criteria, as well as cultural and commercial criteria. So, we will have to comply with all regulations wherever we are. We are consulting with First Nations wherever we are looking, because that's very important. It's very important not to have an impact on local fisheries and to make sure that stakeholders in the region are fully engaged and invested. In addition to that, obviously, just as important, if not more important, is that there should be no impact on, no negative effects on wildlife. And we're looking for an area of approximately 65 to 70 acres with a minimum depth of 15 meters over at least 50% of the sanctuary, with good flushing rate and avoidance of sewage and pollutants, no ice cover, accessible, and somewhere where there are utilities and infrastructure. So that's a long list, and we are trying to find a site that provides all these, that meets all these criteria. So our updates on site selection at this point is that we now have several potential sites in Nova Scotia. We were there twice last year, going back in October. There are several potential sites in British Columbia. We were there a couple of months ago. So a number of sites in Johnstone Strait that have a lot of potential. And in Washington State, we are still looking. In the States, there's a lot more to contend with, and we have southern resident orcas there who are very vulnerable, and so we are still looking for a site that would provide the same level of matching of the criteria that we found in both British Columbia and Nova Scotia. Here's our timeline and milestones. We began the Whale Sanctuary Project in April of 2016, so we're pretty new. Have over 50 advisors and a board of 5 experts, including Dr. Naomi Rose and Dave Phillips, Carl Safina, and Dave, as I mentioned, Dave Phillips, and also Charles Binnick as our executive director. And many of the people in the room with you today are also on the advisory committee. So we're very, very fortunate to have this level of expertise. In August, we started desktop site survey and strategic planning and completed that in February of this year. So we have a 10-year strategic plan. In April, we received a challenge grant from a major donor, Munchkin Corporation, which is a baby product company in California. And we began site visits to Washington and DC, and we're still engaged in that process. But we are hoping to end the site selection process by the end of this year and begin a procurement process, which means that by the end of this year, we are hoping to narrow down our list of potential sites between 2 to 3, and by the beginning of 2018, start to narrow that down further and come up with these sites in the early part of 2018, that we can then begin to try to procure. And our plan right now is to open a sanctuary with the first residents by the end of 2019. So that's just a snapshot of where we are right now. Please visit us on our website and on Facebook and Twitter. And as you know, you can always email me or call me, and I'm more than happy to discuss with you what we're doing in more detail and to answer any questions. So thank you. Okay. Okay.
Vale. Bueno, tenim 5 minuts.
We have, I believe, 5 minutes for questions. If anybody has a question, please go ahead.
English, for her, for Laurie.
I can hear, there's a bit of an echo, but I think I can hear.
Okay, Laurie, I've seen your project, and there's a viewing area. I don't know about the US laws, but according to European law, that would be considered a zoo. Are you aware of that?
Can you, someone will have to repeat that. I'm so sorry. I can't hear with that echo. We've heard that criticism quite a lot, that, you know, the sanctuary that we're building is simply going to be a zoo moved to the ocean or a sea pen or something like that. We've heard that generally leveled by the captivity industry, and it's due to just a basic misunderstanding of what we're trying to do and what an authentic sanctuary is. What we're trying to do is create an authentic sanctuary, not a marine zoo. And what that means is that we abide by a number of criteria, including no performances, no breeding, no intrusion by the public, and so forth. So anyone who thinks that what we're trying to do is build a zoo should take a look at really what we're trying to do, because what we're doing is actually trying to give back to these animals as much of the natural environment as we possibly can. And that is really an anti-zoo, if you will, effort.
Eso en Europa.
Well, in Europe, that would be considered by law as a zoo. It's not an opinion, it's just pure regulations.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, it's really interesting. And so one of the interesting things here is to try to really define what each of us is doing, and to try to understand as well some of the differences in definitions that, you know, might occur in Europe versus the United States or North America, and try to come to some common language so that we can speak to each other and try to support each other without any misunderstanding.
Carla, can I respond to David's question as a representative of the Whale Sanctuary Project? So I'm answering for Lori because I'm a policy expert. And
hi, Naomi.
Hello. I mean, no, I'm just answering David's question. So in response to your question, it would be against the law in the United States not to have the viewing area. So if the sanctuary ends up being in the U.S., the animals must be on public display. There's no other option in U.S. law. But your point is well taken that, you know, because we want to have the public able to view the animals, even if it's in Canada where the law is different, it may be seen as a zoo. And so then Lori's answer is the answer. But in the U.S., we must have a viewing area. It's by law.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just to thank you, Naomi, for clarifying that. But, you know, public display has a lot of dimensions, and it could be something as non-intrusive as being able to view the animals from the land. It doesn't mean that they have to be in a tank right up to your face and performing tricks. So we'll work within those regulations, but we feel that we can comfortably do that and not intrude upon the animals as well.
Okay, last question, and we go to the next speaker. Ah, ya está.
Yes, a question for Lori. She was saying that it should not have an impact on the wildlife of the area, but of course, it might happen. So then, does this worry you? Does it concern you? Because it might be an unsurmountable obstacle to the development of this. And do you have information of any killer whale? Because, of course, in internet you can read plenty of things, but I would like to know for sure, has there been any successful case of a killer whale that after captivity managed to be part of a group, of a pod in the sea? Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for your questions. The first one being about concerns about the effects on wild populations. Absolutely. It's first and foremost in our mind, and we continue to think about that. And that's part of the criteria that we have to meet in order to cite a sanctuary somewhere, is we have to look at whether there's going to be a negative impact upon not only the other orcas in the region, the wild orcas, but all of the other species of animals that are in the area. So we would definitely look to minimize or mitigate as much as we could those negative impacts. As far as the second question is concerned, we have a couple of examples of animals who have been rehabilitated and returned to the wild. One was Springer, who is an orca up in the Johnstone Strait, who successfully rehabbed and released, but she was only in captivity for a short while. She's now living in a pod, and she has 2 children. The other example is Keiko, and we have a number of people on our team who were working with Keiko, and of course Keiko was successfully released, although he never joined another pod. But keep in mind that as much as we've learned from these experiences, that what we are looking to do is provide lifetime care. We are not looking to take the animal, put them in a sea pen for a few months and then release them. We want to provide lifetime care for these animals, and rehab and release would be taken on a case-by-case basis, but it's pretty clear that most of the residents would not be candidates for release, and what we would want to do is provide the best life for them possible within the sanctuary. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, we're going for the next Skype talk and the last one.
Hello, this is John Racanelli. Hi. Yes. Yes, and would you like to be confined to 20 minutes? Okay, very good. Except when we're doing maybe. Yes, I will. Very good. And I suppose you'll mute your microphone while I'm talking so that I don't have the feedback. It looks like you just did. Okay. Yes, well, it is. Let me go ahead and add this. Start. And then they see that. Good? Okay. Oh. And there, let's go back to the beginning. Okay. So, yes, we are pleased to be able to speak to you. And I am John Racanelli. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the National Aquarium in the U.S. And as I think some of you already know, we have made a decision to move our dolphins to a sanctuary by the year 2020. There's a lot of story behind why we are doing this, but I think it's best simply to say that we know it's the right thing to do. We have learned very much about caring for dolphins, as has Barcelona Zoo and others, and so we know that we can do better. And because of that, we have made this decision, and we will move the dolphins by the year 2020. And I'll speak in a moment about why it's 3 years from now. We spent quite a bit of time focused on doing this as well as possible. I think those of us who are leading this effort, and that includes, I think, the people in the room now in Barcelona, we need to ensure the very best proof of concept, the very best execution of this, because many eyes are watching, and the stakes, therefore, are very high. For us, this has meant identifying both the place, but also the principles and also the practices. As you can see on the screen, we have been exploring this concept since 2011, and we identified the fact that our mission is to advance understanding and protection of cetaceans by offering a natural environment in which this colony of dolphins in our care will thrive. So it is a place, but it is also supported by an important set of principles, and that governs a set of practices. So as far as the place, well, of course, the primary thing is that it is a new option for human care of dolphins in a spectrum that stretches from traditional captive keeping of dolphins to, we think, this version. And there are many variables, of course, in how humans care for dolphins now. Whether it's in the seawater, which is what we're proposing to do in an outdoor facility in natural seawater, with a flexible habitat configuration that can be customized to meet the dolphin's needs. We've made it very clear from the beginning that our purpose is for applied science to advance knowledge and conservation, and we have set out the objective that it must be independent and sustainable in terms of funding. The principles that this then is governed by is the very most important one is what we call Dolphin First. And as you can see in the center of the screen, the individual needs of the dolphins take priority over those of all others, including the public, including scientists, and even donors. And so we are affording the highest level of choice and control to the dolphins. And I'm sure that many of you are familiar with what is meant by that concept, but this is to ensure that they have the 5 opportunities to thrive, that they have the opportunities as animals in our care for excellent diet, self-maintenance, optimal health, the ability to express natural behaviors, and have control over their surroundings and over the kind of activities that they go through each day. We want this to be a collaborative learning environment, and that includes the dolphins learning. And we are going to be developing techniques and technologies to help advance our study of dolphins in the wild. We think this can provide a good opportunity to better understand what dolphins face in the oceans, and in doing so, help prevent the loss of marine mammals in nature. The practices that this drives, you can see on the right. We are setting out customized individual care plans for each dolphin. We have 7 dolphins here at the National Aquarium. We are sizing the facility to be able to accommodate up to 20 dolphins. As I mentioned earlier, we want to be able to participate in and even sponsor studies that can benefit both dolphins in the wild as well as those in human care. And we have made the decision not to allow the dolphins to breed. So we will practice birth control with these dolphins because it is not our objective to perpetuate this population. And then, of course, as we have always done as a scientific institution, we will share our work with others. And we hope to do that both via digital means back to Baltimore, where the dolphins have lived for 30 years, and also remotely throughout the United States and potentially even internationally. But we're very, very closely focused on proving this concept and doing it extremely well. We have a unique opportunity here because we are an organization that actually is caring for dolphins now. Let me see here. I had another slide that didn't come up. There we go. Oh, well. We have been looking at sites throughout the Western Hemisphere, that is the United States, the Caribbean, and Central America. We have focused our attention mostly on the Caribbean and Florida, and this is a picture of the lower Florida Keys, which of course recently were also impacted by Hurricane Irma. And so part of our assessment obviously is looking at the ability to protect the dolphins from hurricane risk, at the same time that we still believe this represents the best locations in the United States for keeping the dolphins. We are also looking in, we had looked in the Virgin Islands and had ruled out the Virgin Islands, mainly because of accessibility to the states. We've also been looking in Puerto Rico, and we continue to assess sites there. We have assessed over 30 sites. We've now begun to bring it down to a few sites, and these stars represent a few of those sites in the Florida Keys. We're looking both at open water sites, which I think is what people first assume is the best alternative, but also lagoons that were previously quarries. As we've looked very carefully at the water quality of these lagoons and also the conditions there, we believe they can meet these criteria that are so important to our assessment. First, that we have a seaside location with excellent water quality, significantly larger than where the dolphins live today, with millions and tens of millions and even hundreds of millions of liters of seawater and variable depths at high quality. We need to have a shoreside, fully equipped hospital and treatment facility with a full-time marine mammal veterinarian on staff, and probably we'll have on-site medical capabilities, including endoscopy, radiology, ultrasound, possibly CT scanning. Again, because we anticipate that there will be more than our 7 dolphins living here over time, we want to make sure that it has the best possible facilities. As we talk about the flexibility of a natural seawater habitat, on the one hand, it needs to closely emulate native habitat with vegetated shorelines, natural bottoms, etc. But it also needs to have the ability to create pools or separations that are accessible by docks, allowing individual social groups to coexist. For example, if a new dolphin comes to this facility, you don't want them moving directly into contact with the other dolphins because social groupings might create aggression and other behaviors that you need to gently introduce those dolphins together. And that also means having the capability for at least one isolation pool with a recirculating system, which would help provide both a refuge during environmental events and also allows you, perhaps if you did have a stranded animal, to keep that animal isolated. Finally, the staffing model. We've identified a minimum of 10 professional animal care specialists. The full-time veterinarian, it needs to be a secure facility, and then research personnel who will come with their funding, and on-site lodging to allow 24/7 human presence. These are a couple of slides of some of the sites that we have looked at. These are quarry sites, and we have found that these are probably a more effective way of doing this than open water. And unfortunately, with the hurricane conditions that we've just experienced, this is proving to be even more suitable because, as you can see from this slide, this body of water is separated by a very thin but and permeable mangrove edge that allows water to flow in, but also protects this body of water from ocean surge up to a certain point. And it also protects the dolphins from factors that at this point we can't control for, such as red tides or oil spills or other anthropogenic risks that might come out from the ocean. And as it turns out, these sites are actually quite expansive bodies of water. They will feel very much like living in the ocean to a dolphin. And mind you, these dolphins, I'm not sure about Barcelona's, but our dolphins have never seen the ocean. So to them, at the outset, the ocean will be a frightening place. The site costs that we are assessing these sites for, all costs considered, will range from 10 to 15 million US dollars. Since we announced this news, we've been working with our dolphins to prepare them for this move and for acclimating to the sanctuary. And we have begun the process now of preparing them to actually get on an airplane and make this transfer. We're very aware, we've moved dolphins before, but we're very aware that these dolphins are not accustomed to moving, and one of the most stressful aspects of these kinds of things is the actual process of moving the dolphins and then acclimating them to their new site. 2 more points, I think, and then I will pause and ask for any questions from our colleagues. We're working very closely with colleagues in the industry. We've learned that it does not behoove us to move into a different position with those who currently care for dolphins in places like Florida. I can tell you that some of the people in the captive industry wish we weren't doing this, but we have brought together workshops that have included people even from the U.S. company SeaWorld and others who work in the swim with programs to both review best practices and talk about innovations for moving and acclimating the dolphins. And of course, there is a lot of talent there. We're also working as closely as possible with our colleagues in the NGO world. And in fact, in October of this year, October 28th, we'll be participating in a workshop at the Society of Marine Mammalogy Conference in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. And several of I think our colleagues in the room Whale Sanctuary Project, Whale Dolphin Conservation will also be there, and I believe some of them will be in the workshop. I will be there. And we're keeping very close contact with those members of the NGO community that have overlapping interests with us. You might have heard of Janesse Brewer. She is our project consultant, and she too will be attending. And we'd be very happy to meet with any of you in person if you're going to be there at that time. So I'm done with my presentation. I think what I'll do is come back to the screen, and if there are any questions from our colleagues, I would be more than happy to try to address them. Very good.
Yeah, there is time for 5 minutes questions. One moment.
Fine.
Hola, ahora sí.
Hello. Hello. Good afternoon. I would like to know if the decision of the National Aquarium of Baltimore to release, not to have more captive dolphins, has gone hand in hand with regulation by the town council or the municipality to forbid having dolphins in captivity, and whether there is any other aquarium in the US that will follow suit.
Altres institucions, altres aquaris o delfinaris.
If there are other aquaria or zoos that are interested in what Baltimore is doing to follow suit.
Yes. Our government is not requiring any discontinuation of keeping of dolphins and whales in the U.S. at this time. We made this decision ourselves. We made the decision based on what we deem to be the best possible welfare for our dolphins. We felt that this was the right thing to do at the right time, based in great measure on how much we've learned about the needs of the dolphins, the needs for self-expression, the needs for greater choice and control, and what it means for dolphins to thrive under human care. It's important to note that in our world of caring for marine mammals, they are very dependent on human beings because of the way that these dolphins have been brought up in their lives. And so we do feel that while there's a desire to perhaps think about taking the dolphins to the ocean and releasing them, we also know that that would not be a good outcome for the dolphins. There have been very few successful releases up till now of dolphins that were born and raised in captivity, then being released into the ocean. We're hoping to prove a concept here that could include their learning of survival skills. But we're making no promises, and it's very likely that these dolphins will stay in our care for their entire life. Now, the other part of the question was about whether there are others considering this. They're very privately doing so. We have heard from a couple of American institutions that have also made this, have also had this debate. I think in most cases they're debating. And up until now in the States, what's happened is when an organization, a zoo or an aquarium, has decided to stop keeping dolphins or whales, they've simply dispersed those dolphins or whales to other zoos and aquariums. So we're the first in the States and perhaps anywhere right now that have said, we have the dolphins, we know how to care for these dolphins, and we are going to provide them with this new home.
This could be for you or also for you. In the three last presentations, we heard that you are going to have some breeding control with the animals. How you're going to do that? With medication, keeping the males away, or what's the different options that you have to do that?
I was able to hear only parts of it. Could you paraphrase for me, please? Well, up until now, we've actually, for several years now, since 2011, we have actually done the birth control simply by keeping the males and females separated. We have 5 females and 2 males. However, as the males have matured and have become more sexually active, we decided that we wanted them to be able to at least express natural behavior. So we have put the females on a birth control regimen of Regimate. We are not sure what the long-term plan will be. We know that there is still some discussion around whether Regimate is long-term chronic use of Regimate can have any negative side effects or not. We've also learned that there is at least the beginnings of some capability now to vasectomize dolphins, and we might see ourselves doing that with males. But we have made a pretty important decision that we are not going to continue to breed the dolphins because our objective is not to perpetuate this sanctuary forever. Thank you. I wish I could be there, and I applaud you for your deep inquiry and hope you can make a very good decision here. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so now we have one question for Anastasia, very, very short.
It's a question regarding sanctuaries. You all said that there will be no further breeding, so the sanctuary will not last forever, as he said. In this space that has been affected by human beings, so what will you do with sanctuaries once your purpose is over, in the long, long run, I guess? What will it become of these places?
You understand? Yeah. Okay.
So yes, it's a long way until sanctuaries are no longer needed. As many speakers said earlier, we're dealing about hundreds or thousands of animals around the world that will require. The aim is obviously no breeding, sanctuaries to not become needed, and the first alternative that will have a parallel role from the beginning of the sanctuary will be to become a first aid center for wild animals that will require care. At least the sanctuary in the Aegean, in Lipsy Island, is based around a veterinary clinic. So when, and hopefully one day it's no longer required, then it will be a veterinary center for marine mammals, dolphins, monk seals, and turtles. But that's very far ahead, sadly.
Okay, we have to finish now. Gracias a todos por haber vingut.
Thank you very much to all of you for being here. We'll see you tomorrow at 9:30. Alba? Can you confirm that? 9:30? Okay, 9:30 tomorrow morning.
And the speakers, if you can meet Alba, please, because she wants to give you instructions for the dinner and give you a present from the City Hall and well, meet Alba. De 9:30 a 1:30.